Tonight's story is called The Lighthouse Keeper. This is a sleep story for the restless mind, for the mind that notices everything, processes everything, and finds it difficult to simply stop. This story was created specifically for the neurodivergent and the anxious mind, using a gentle blend of hypnotic storytelling and rich sensory detail to guide you naturally and without effort towards sleep. You don't need to try to sleep. You don't need to clear your mind or force yourself into stillness. Just follow the story and allow it to do what it was made to do, which is carry you gently all the way to rest. Before we begin, please note, this session is for sleep only. Never listen while driving or operating anything. That requires your full attention. This story is not a replacement for professional, medical, or mental health support. If tonight, the Lighthouse Keeper becomes your place, the story you return to, on the nights your mind won't settle, please consider subscribing. There are more stories and more sessions being created for minds just like yours, and they will always be here whenever you need them. Now, find your position, let your eyes close, and allow the Lighthouse Keeper to begin. Before we reach the lighthouse, let's prepare the mind and the body for the journey. Take a breath in, slow and easy, and let it go completely. Just like that. Another breath in, filling you gently, and out, releasing whatever the day left behind. And one more, in and out. And as that breath leaves you, feel your shoulders drop just slightly, just enough to notice the difference between holding and releasing. Your jaw soft now, your hands open, your legs heavy. The surface beneath you is solid and steady and completely supporting your weight. You don't need to hold yourself up. You haven't needed to this whole time. Let yourself feel that support now, fully. And as your body settles, your mind can begin to do something it rarely gets the opportunity to do. It can follow a story without needing to solve it, without needing to analyze it, without needing to do anything with it at all, except listen and follow and allow it to carry you gently towards sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the story begin. There is an island you may not have heard of. It doesn't appear on many maps, and the ones that do show it mark it only with a small pale dot and the words Far Point written in letters so small you have to lean in to read them. The island is not large. You could walk the full length of it in perhaps 40 minutes if you took your time, which is the only way anyone has ever walked on Far Point, because there is nowhere to be in a hurry and nothing that requires your rushing. The island sits in a stretch of water that is dark and deep and very still at this hour, the kind of still that the ocean only manages late at night when the wind has gone. Wherever wind goes, when it rests, and the surface of the water becomes something close to glass, reflecting the sky so perfectly that the stars above and the stars below become difficult to tell apart. At the highest point of Far Point Island sits a lighthouse. It is not a particularly grand lighthouse. It is old and weathered, and the white paint on its lower half has taken on a pale gray quality from decades of salt air and sea mist, and the particular patient weathering that happens to things that have stood in one place for a very long time. But it is a good lighthouse, a reliable one. Its light has turned every night without fail for longer than anyone currently living can remember. And at the base of the lighthouse, attached to its southern wall, is a small cottage with 4 rooms in thick stone walls and windows, whose glass has rippled slightly with age, so that when you look through them at the water, it appears to move, even when it is perfectly still. This is where the Lighthouse Keeper lives. His name is not important. He has been here long enough that the island simply calls him the Keeper, and he has been here long enough that he no longer needs any other name. He is not a young man, but he is not an old one either. He is somewhere in between the age that a person reaches when they have stopped counting and started simply being. He came to the island many years ago for reasons he no longer thinks about, and stayed for reasons he couldn't quite explain, even if someone asked, which no one ever does, because the island doesn't get many visitors, and the ones who do arrive by the occasional supply boat that comes once a month from the mainland tend to be too busy unloading crates of tinned food and lamp oil and fresh rope to ask much of anything. Tonight, the supply boat came and went hours ago, and the Keeper has had his supper and washed his single plate and his single cup and placed them back on the shelf where they always live. And now the evening belongs entirely to him. The Keeper makes his way from the small kitchen through a low doorway and into the room he likes best of all the rooms in the cottage, his workshop. It is not a large room. A single window faces the water. A workbench runs along the far wall, worn smooth by years of use. Above the bench, shelves hold an ordered collection of small tools, their handles dark with age, their blades kept clean and sharp and ready. On the bench itself sits the project he has been working on for the past several weeks. A clock, not a grand clock, not a clock intended for any particular important place, just a clock that he is making because he likes the making, because the small, careful, deliberate work of fitting one tiny piece to another is the kind of work that quiets everything else. The Keeper pulls out his chair, a low wooden thing, worn smooth at the seat from years of evenings just like this one, and sits and reaches for the lamp on the corner of the bench and turns it up just slightly, just enough to see clearly without flooding the room with too much light. The lamp gives off a warm amber glow that falls across the bench and the tools and the half-made clock in the Keeper's hands as he picks up the smallest one of his screwdrivers and leans forward and begins outside the window. The lighthouse beam makes its slow, steady revolution. Every few seconds, a sweep of light passes across the workshop ceiling and then moves on, and the room returns to the warm amber quiet of the lamp. The Keeper doesn't notice the light anymore. He has lived with it for so long that it has become part of the rhythm of his nights, like breathing, like the sound of the water against the rocks below, just there, always there, reliable and constant and completely unremarkable. He works in silence, except for the sounds. That silence actually contains when you listen carefully enough. The faint tick of the mechanism he is assembling, the soft scratch of the screwdriver against brass, the occasional creak of the cottage settling into itself in the way that old buildings do. At night, when the temperature drops and the stones contract slightly and everything adjusts imperceptibly, just a fraction, just enough to release whatever the day built up within them, the keeper picks up a gear so small it sits on the tip of his finger, barely visible in the lamplight. He holds it up and examines it, turning it slowly this way and that, looking for anything that might prevent it from doing what it was made to do, which is turn smoothly and quietly and reliably for years without complaint. He finds nothing wrong and sets it carefully back down on the small square of cloth he uses to keep the tiny pieces from rolling away, and picks up the next one. Beyond the window, the water makes its sounds. It is not a stormy night. Far from it. The weather on Far Point tonight is the kind that sailors used to call a good rest, a night when the sea decides to be gentle, when the waves come in slow and low and spend themselves quietly against the rocks with a sound like a long, slow exhale, and then pull back with a soft drawing sound like something being smoothed over and over by patient, unhurried hands. The keeper has heard this sound every night for years, and it still does something to him, something he couldn't quite name if he tried. A settling, a reminder that the water was here before him and will be here long after, and that the rocks it moves against have been receiving it patiently for longer than any mind can comfortably hold, and that this small warm room, this quiet work, this lamp and these tools and this clock that is slowly becoming what it was always going to be is exactly enough for one evening on one island in one small corner of a very large and mostly quiet world. He sets down his screwdriver and picks up a small brush made from the finest, softest bristles and sweeps the surface of the mechanism gently, removing the invisible particles of dust that settle on everything, regardless of how carefully you keep a room. The brush moves in small, careful circles, and the keeper watches the lamplight catch the brass and gleam briefly and then settle back into its quiet shine. After a while, the keeper sets down his tools and goes to the kitchen. He fills the small kettle from the tap and places it on the stove and leans against the counter while it heats. The kitchen is simple, a wooden table, 2 chairs, though he only ever uses one, a window above the sink through which, on clear nights, he can see the beam of the lighthouse sweeping across the water. He watches it now while the kettle begins its quiet building toward the boil. The beam goes out and returns, goes out and returns, steady and reliable and completely indifferent to whether anyone is watching it or not. It simply does what it was built to do and has always done and will continue to do long after this particular evening is over. The kettle begins to whisper a soft building sound that rises slowly from almost nothing to a gentle, steady hiss, and the keeper reaches for it just before it begins to sing, because he has done this so many times that his hand moves before his mind, does muscle memory carrying him through the familiar sequence of cup and spoon and the dark, loose leaf tea he measures carefully every time, not because he has to, but because the measuring is part of the ritual, and the ritual is part of the evening, and the evening is part of what makes this island feel like home. He carries his cup back to the workshop and sets it on the small cork mat he keeps beside the lamp for exactly this purpose, and wraps both hands around it for a moment, feeling the warmth move through his palms and into his fingers, and sits looking out of the window at the water, which is doing what water does at this hour on a calm night on a small island far from the mainland. It is being still and dark and quietly extraordinary. The tea cools slowly as the keeper returns to his work. He is close now to the point where the mechanism will be complete enough to test. He works without hurrying, each piece placed with the same deliberate, unhurried care as the last. There is something deeply satisfying about work that cannot be rushed, work that requires only patience and attention and the willingness to do the same small thing correctly over and over until the small things add up to something that works. He seats the final gear into its place and holds his breath without meaning to, and then releases it and uses the tip of his finger to give the mechanism the gentlest possible nudge, and listens. Tick, a single tick, clean and clear and perfectly weighted, and then another tick and another tick, tick, tick. The keeper sits back in his chair and listens to the clock, finding its rhythm the way all clocks do, at first slightly uneven, slightly searching, and then settling into the steady, reliable, unhurried beat that it will keep from now on. Tick, tick, tick. He picks up his tea, which is the perfect temperature now, and takes a slow sip and listens to the clock and the water and the occasional creak of the cottage and the steady, distant rhythm of the lighthouse beam sweeping and returning, sweeping and returning, and everything in the room, in the cottage, on the island, in the water, surrounding it is doing exactly what it should be doing at this hour, on this night, in this quiet corner of the world. After a while, the keeper finishes his tea and sets the cup on the mat and looks at the clock for a long, quiet moment. He doesn't wind it, not tonight. Tonight, he just listens to it. Tick, tick, tick. Then he reaches for the lamp and turns it down slowly, watching the warm amber light dim and contract until it is just a small, steady glow, enough to see by, but only just enough to make the room feel like the inside of something warm and held and completely safe. He covers the clock with a small square of cloth, not to silence it, but to protect it from the dust that settles on everything overnight. And still, through the cloth, faintly, almost as if from very far away, tick, 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 he pushes back his chair and crosses to the window and looks out at the water. For a moment, the beam sweeps across the surface, and in that brief illuminated moment, the water looks like hammered silver, and then the beam moves on and the water returns to its deep, quiet, dark. The keeper nods at nothing in particular, or perhaps at everything in general, and turns from the window and moves toward the door of the workshop, pausing in the doorway to take one last look at the bench, at the tools, at the cloth beneath which something new ticks quietly in the dark. The keeper's bedroom is at the top of a short stone staircase, each step worn slightly in the center from years of the same feet climbing the same stairs at the same hour every night. The bedroom is small, a bed pushed against the wall beneath a window that faces east, so that in the morning, if the weather is clear, the first light falls directly across the pillow. A small table beside the bed holds a glass of water and a book that the keeper has been reading for several weeks. He reads slowly, not because he is a slow reader, but because he reads each page twice, because he likes to make a good thing last. The keeper sits on the edge of the bed and removes his boots and sets them neatly side by side on the floor, the way he always does, and swings his legs up and settles back against the pillow and lies for a moment looking at the ceiling. On the ceiling, every few seconds, the lighthouse beam sweeps a pale arc of light across the plaster, and then the room returns to dark, and then the light comes again, slow and steady and completely reliable. The keeper watches it the way he has watched it on thousands of nights before this one, and feels the same thing he always feels when he watches it from this bed, in this room, on this island, a quiet certainty that everything is exactly as it should be, that the light is doing its work, that the water is doing its work, that the clock downstairs is doing its work, tick, 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 and that he has done his from somewhere below, faintly through the stone of the floor and the wood of the ceiling. The clock continues, tick, 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 and from outside, the water continues its slow, patient conversation with the rocks, and the lighthouse continues its turning, its sweeping, its faithful revolution that it has made and will make, without pause, without hurry, without needing to be reminded why. The keeper closes his eyes, and the room becomes something felt rather than seen. The warmth of the blanket, the weight of it across his chest, the faint salt smell of the air coming in through the gap at the top of the window that he always leaves open, just slightly, just enough for the night to come in a little, the way night should, the way quiet should, the way rest should, just a little, just enough, The light sweeps across his eyelids, and he feels it, even through closed eyes, a warmth, brief and gentle, and then gone, and then returning, and then gone, and then returning, like a reminder that everything is still exactly where it should be. And the clock, tick, 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 and the water, and the light, and the weight of the blanket, and the smell of the sea and the island settling into itself for another ordinary, extraordinary night of being exactly what it is, which is enough, which has always been enough, which will always be enough, and somewhere on a small island that doesn't appear on many maps, a lighthouse keeper lets go of the day completely, and the clock keeps time for him, and the water keeps its rhythm for him, and the light keeps its turning for him, and he has nothing left to do except rest, just here, just this, just a tick of something working quietly in the dark, just the sound of water that has always been there and always will be, just the sweep of a light that asks nothing of anyone except to be seen briefly, and then to let the dark return. And it does, it always does, and the dark is not empty, it is full of the sound of the clock and the water and the turning light, and everything is exactly as it should be on this island, on this night, in this room, where someone is already almost asleep, and the clock keeps time. Tick, 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 the water against the rocks, the light turning, the clock, tick, 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 the island settling, everything still, the water, the light, tick, tick, the keeper sleeping, the island quiet, the water, tick, the light, everything still, tick, tick, the water quiet, still, tick,